She showed off her lover in front of everyone, laughing as if I was invisible and people thought I was the weak one, until his wife stood up, and the room discovered who the real man was. Backhand index pointing right, subscribe, hit like, and drop a comment if you want to hear how this night flipped upside down. The evening began like any other formal dinner, a gathering of executives, their spouses, and friends in a downtown hotel ballroom dressed in chandeliers and white tablecloths. I walked in with my wife, Karen, expecting the usual small talk, forced smiles, and the dull rhythm of polite clinking glasses. I had trained myself to keep my expression neutral, my body still, and my voice calm, even when inside I felt the weight of her growing distance. That night, though, I immediately noticed her energy was different, charged, almost electric, like she was hiding a secret she couldn't wait to let out. I should have trusted my gut when I saw the quick sideways glances she kept throwing at a man across the room. He was tall, slick in a charcoal suit, with a grin that seemed rehearsed, and every time she caught his eye her own face lit up. I kept my silence, nodding politely to colleagues, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, though deep inside my chest my anger stirred like fire behind glass. When the seating began, fate placed me right across from the man I already knew in my bones was more than just a colleague. Karen sat beside him, her arm brushing his deliberately, her laugh louder than usual, her smile exaggerated, every gesture choreographed for the audience watching. She leaned close to him, whispering something, then tossed her hair back, her laughter sharp enough to slice through the hum of conversation at the table. Guests started noticing. I could feel their eyes flicking between the three of us, me, her, and him, as if watching a play unfold. Some smirked, others exchanged quiet murmurs, but nobody stepped in. Nobody ever does. Karen picked up her glass of wine and said loudly enough for half the table to hear, "You know, John here always keeps me entertained. He has such a sharp wit, unlike some people who prefer to stay silent." The sting of her words hit me like a slap across the face, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I took a sip of my drink, held my gaze steady, and let the silence between us stretch, suffocating in its weight. My colleagues chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh along or to look away. John, the lover, leaned back in his chair, smug, clearly enjoying the attention and the quiet humiliation she was trying to pin on me. Inside, though, I wasn't broken. I was cold, calculating, waiting. I kept still as if nothing mattered, because I knew moments like this had a way of turning. And that turn, I sensed, was closer than anyone in that room could have predicted. Part 2 began as the dinner plates were brought out, the smell of roasted duck and garlic potatoes filling the air, but I barely noticed the food. My focus stayed sharp on every move my wife made, every laugh that spilled too easily from her lips when John leaned close. She wanted me to feel small, invisible, like an old suit she no longer bothered to wear. And it worked for the audience, or at least for a while. I saw the way people at the surrounding tables shifted in their seats, sneaking glances at me, their expressions caught between pity and amusement. Karen thrived on those glances. She raised her glass once more, clinking it against John's, their laughter bouncing off the walls of the ballroom, making sure everyone's attention stayed locked on her little performance. I sat still, my fork untouched, my hands steady around my glass of water. The tension in the room was electric, the kind that makes people whisper but never act. Some leaned in closer to catch every word. Others pretended to talk among themselves while their eyes flicked back to us again and again. Karen leaned over to John, her voice loud enough to travel. "Can you believe he never says anything? Always so boring. You'd think after years of dinners he'd have learned how to entertain guests. But no, silence is his specialty." Her words drew a chuckle from a man 2 seats down, quickly muffled when his wife shot him a glare. John smirked, clearly pleased, basking in the glow of being flaunted so openly. He didn't mind being used as her weapon. In fact, he enjoyed it. The arrogance in his eyes made my blood run cold. But still, I gave nothing away. My calm was deliberate. My silence was a blade she could not dull no matter how hard she pressed. It was then that the atmosphere began to shift, ever so slightly. A ripple of discomfort spread across the table. People don't like cruelty when it's prolonged. At first, it amuses, but the longer it goes, the more it unsettles. And Karen, blinded by her own need to humiliate me, didn't notice. She pushed harder, laughing louder, leaning closer to John until it seemed almost indecent for a formal dinner. She brushed his hand with hers, then let her fingers linger, eyes sparkling with mock defiance. "At least someone knows how to make me laugh," she said with a flourish, raising her glass again. The words stung, but not in the way she wanted. They fueled something darker, a quiet storm that grew inside me with every insult, every performance. I stayed composed, my jaw set, my eyes steady, refusing to be baited. What Karen didn't know was that others had started to watch her not with admiration, but with discomfort, with judgment. A few whispered to each other behind napkins. One woman across the table shook her head slowly, her lips pressed tight. Even John, for all his swagger, began to look around uneasily, sensing the tension shift though Karen pressed on. She couldn't stop herself now. She was committed to the act, blind to how the audience had turned against her. I knew then that silence was more powerful than any outburst I could have made. It painted me as dignified while she unraveled herself with every word. And then the unexpected happened. The tall doors at the back of the ballroom opened, and in walked a woman who carried herself like she owned every eye in the room. John froze when he saw her. The smile drained from his face, replaced by the pale, tight expression of a man caught. The whispers in the room rose instantly, like a breeze sweeping through leaves. People turned, their attention ripped away from Karen's performance as this woman walked in. She was striking, dressed in deep emerald satin that shimmered under the chandeliers. Her hair swept up elegantly, her eyes sharp and unflinching. And more importantly, everyone knew who she was. John's wife, Rebecca. The air grew heavy, the kind of silence that follows a thunderclap. Guests who had been smirking moments before now exchanged uneasy looks. Karen froze, her glass halfway to her lips, her smile faltering as she tried to process what this meant. John shifted in his chair, his confidence evaporating in seconds, sweat beading at his hairline. I remained still, my eyes fixed on Rebecca as she walked steadily toward our table. The balance of the evening had shifted again, this time entirely out of Karen's hands. Rebecca's heels clicked against the polished floor, every step pulling the room tighter into her orbit. Nobody dared speak now, nobody dared move. All eyes followed her, waiting to see what storm she would unleash. Karen's hand trembled slightly as she set her glass down, trying to regain composure, but the damage was done. For the first time that night, she looked unsure, fragile, a performer caught forgetting her lines. I felt the corner of my mouth twitch upward, not in a smile but in the faint acknowledgement that the show she had scripted so carefully was no longer hers to control. And I sat there in silence, waiting, watching, knowing that the next act would change everything. Rebecca's presence was like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples spread instantly, pulling everyone in. She didn't rush, she didn't falter, she didn't even glance at John, though he sat frozen, his shoulders stiff, his knuckles whitening around the stem of his glass. Karen, on the other hand, tried to adjust, her laugh wobbling as she cleared her throat and attempted to mask her unease with bravado. "Well, look who decided to join us," she said, her voice pitched just a touch too high, her words spilling too fast. But no one laughed this time. The same people who had smirked moments earlier now stared at her with cold curiosity, as if they were watching someone dig her own grave with every word. Rebecca reached our table, stopping directly across from me, her eyes cutting through the tension like a knife. She didn't acknowledge Karen. She didn't even spare John a glance. Her gaze landed on me, steady, deliberate, a look that made my pulse quicken though I remained still, calm on the outside. The silence in the room was so thick you could hear the faint clink of a fork somewhere in the distance. Karen, desperate to salvage the show, placed her hand on John's arm and let out a forced laugh. "Oh, Rebecca, don't mind us. We were just enjoying ourselves. Isn't that right?" But Rebecca finally turned her head toward her, her lips curving into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. It was steel wrapped in silk. "I'm sure you were," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the table with a weight that silenced even the whispers. Karen's face flickered, a crack in her confidence that no amount of practiced charm could fix. Rebecca then shifted back to me. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of the table as she leaned in slightly, her eyes locked onto mine. The moment stretched, charged, alive with something unspoken but undeniable. John swallowed hard, finally breaking the silence with a strangled attempt at control. "Rebecca, let's not." But she lifted one finger, silencing him without ever taking her eyes off me. The gesture was so commanding, so final, that the room seemed to collectively exhale in awe. And then, with a grace that seemed rehearsed by fate itself, she stepped closer, leaned down, and placed her hand gently on mine. Karen gasped audibly, her nails digging into John's sleeve, her composure disintegrating before everyone's eyes. Before anyone could process it, Rebecca tilted her head and kissed me. Slow, deliberate, not hidden but performed for every eye in the room. The sound in the ballroom shifted like a storm turning direction. Whispers became gasps, gasps became shocked laughter, and the energy flipped entirely. I felt her lips, soft but resolute, carrying more weight than 100 shouted accusations. Karen's face drained of color, her bravado shattered, her hand falling away from John as if burned. John himself looked gutted, as if the floor had been pulled from beneath him. Around us, guests murmured, their expressions a mix of disbelief, delight, and scandalized glee. A few clapped, unable to resist the drama of it all, while others covered their mouths, wide-eyed. Rebecca pulled back slowly, her expression calm, her eyes still fixed on mine. She didn't need to say a word. The message had already been carved into the air, undeniable and permanent. Karen turned to me, her voice cracking, desperate now. What is this supposed to mean?" Her words came out jagged, almost pleading, but the power she once held had evaporated. No one was laughing with her anymore. No one was whispering about my supposed weakness. Instead, all eyes had turned against her, and she knew it. I leaned back in my chair, my face still calm, my hand resting where Rebecca's had been. I didn't answer Karen. I didn't need to. The silence was enough, the weight of Rebecca's kiss hanging over the table like a verdict. Guests began to exchange glances, some shaking their heads, some smiling thinly, all of them understanding what Karen could not yet accept, that her attempt to humiliate me had backfired so spectacularly she could never recover. John shifted, trying to speak, but his words died in his throat. He had nothing to offer, no defense, no excuse. He had been stripped of dignity by the very person he thought would shield him. Karen sat frozen, her wine glass trembling in her hand, her lips moving soundlessly as if searching for words that would never come. The balance of power had shifted so dramatically it was almost surreal, and I knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same again. I lifted my glass finally, the motion slow, deliberate, and took a sip, letting the silence stretch. The weight of the room pressed in on Karen and John, and for the first time that evening, I felt the satisfaction of knowing that my silence had been louder than any words I could have spoken. The sound of my glass setting back down on the table echoed louder than it should have in the hushed room, like the final punctuation to a chapter everyone knew had just ended. Karen's face was a mask of disbelief, her eyes darting between me and Rebecca as though begging someone to tell her this wasn't real. But it was real. Every guest saw it, every whisper confirmed it, and the humiliation she thought she had scripted for me now belonged to her alone. She opened her mouth, trying again to find words. "This is absurd. You can't just—" Her voice cracked, and she quickly shut her lips, realizing that every syllable made her look more desperate. John sat rigid beside her, his smug confidence gone, replaced by a grimace that looked almost painful. He tried to steady himself, leaning forward, but he couldn't muster the authority to speak. His wife had just destroyed him with a single act of defiance, and everyone in the room knew it. Rebecca, standing beside me with her hand resting lightly on my shoulder now, radiated calm. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't rub salt into the wound. Her silence, like mine, was enough. It told everyone present that she had chosen her side, and it wasn't the one anyone expected. The whispers around us grew louder, a chorus of shock and disbelief. People exchanged knowing looks, some openly smiling now at Karen's downfall. I could hear fragments of murmurs drifting across the table. "Did you see that? She deserved it. Unbelievable." The very same voices that had chuckled at my expense earlier were now laughing at her, and the irony wasn't lost on me. Karen reached out suddenly, her hand brushing John's arm as if clinging to the last shred of her plan. But he recoiled, just slightly, not enough to cause a scene but enough for everyone to notice. The rejection stung her worse than any insult could have. Her expression crumbled, the mask slipping completely, and for the first time in years I saw her without the armor of arrogance. Vulnerable, exposed, undone. I didn't move. I didn't speak. My calm was deliberate, a choice sharper than any outburst could have been. Because the truth was that nothing I could say would be louder than what had already happened. Rebecca leaned down slightly, her voice low but carrying clearly in the silence. "Strange, isn't it? How quickly people show their true selves." She straightened again, her eyes flicking to Karen for the briefest moment before settling back on me. It was a dismissal, pure and simple, the kind that cut deeper than any tirade. The weight of her words settled over the table like a curtain falling on the final act of a play. Karen sat motionless, her wine glass still trembling in her hand, her knuckles white as if she could hold on to her old world by sheer force. But it was gone. Everyone knew it. Everyone saw it. John finally muttered something under his breath, his voice hoarse. "Let's go." It wasn't a command, not even a suggestion. It was an escape attempt. He pushed his chair back, the screech of wood against marble slicing through the room. Karen looked at him in horror, realizing that not only had she lost control of the evening, but the man she paraded as her trophy was crumbling right beside her. She shook her head, whispered his name, but he avoided her gaze. He couldn't face her, not after being stripped bare in front of everyone. They left without ceremony, their exit clumsy, Karen stumbling as if the ground itself had betrayed her. The guests parted in silence to let them through, eyes following them until the doors closed behind. And then, like the release of a held breath, the room filled with noise again. Laughter, applause even, as though a performance had ended and the audience couldn't contain their reaction. People clapped me on the back, raised their glasses in my direction, their smiles now genuine. The very ones who had doubted me minutes before now saw me differently, and I didn't have to say a word. I simply lifted my glass once more, met Rebecca's eyes, and gave the faintest nod. She smiled then, not for the crowd, not for the spectacle, but for me. It was quiet, personal, unshakable. I didn't need to revel in Karen's humiliation, didn't need to gloat or speak a single word of triumph. The silence, the stillness, the calm, that was the victory. Karen had sought to make me the shadow of the evening, but in her desperation she had illuminated her own betrayal so brightly it burned her down to ashes. And in that moment, as the laughter and whispers swirled around me, I realized something simple and profound. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not in shouting, not in fighting, but in letting the truth reveal itself with devastating clarity. Karen had called me useless. But now, with the entire room on my side and Rebecca's quiet strength beside me, the truth was undeniable. And in that moment she understood, perhaps for the first time in her life, that silence can sometimes be louder than thunder. Subscribe, like, and leave a comment if you want to hear more stories where betrayal turns on itself and the quietest voice becomes the one that echoes the longest.